Okay, we are ready to begin. Welcome to the Jewish Museum, everyone. My name is Nellie Szilagyi-Benedek, and I'm the Deputy Director of Education and Programs. We are so pleased to have the opportunity to host this program, organized in collaboration with the National Library of Israel's U.S. affiliate, the NLI USA. The program will be followed by a reception in the back of the room, and we also encourage you to explore our current special exhibition on this floor, Paul Klee, Other Possible Worlds, which closes on July 26th. The galleries will remain open until 8 p.m. I hope you will take the opportunity to see the powerful works of art on view. Thank you for joining us at the Jewish Museum. And now I would like to invite Adina Canfield, CEO of NLI USA, to come up and introduce the program.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Nellie. Your partnership has been amazing, and that of you and your team, and we are very, very grateful to be here today. I also want to just take a second to thank my colleague Allison Lee and Oriel Heilman, give a wave, who are with me today from the National Library of Israel. You've done outstanding work already for the library, and we're really glad that you're here today. I'm so delighted to welcome all of you to this special program bringing together two vital cultural institutions, the National Library of Israel and the Jewish Museum. It's wonderful to see so many dear friends of both institutions here today. The National Library of Israel, as part of its renewal and the opening of a new campus in Jerusalem in October of 2023, just a few weeks after the horrors of October 7th, has been expanding its efforts to bring the library's cultural treasures and programs to a wider audience around the world. This program is part of that new era and commitment. We're especially pleased to share the work of Hadassa Goldvicht, whose artistic practice has become deeply intertwined with the library, most recently through Hadassa's exhibit at NLI in Jerusalem, To the Internal Libraries, which was a smashing success at NLI. On the surface, Hadassa's work reveals the literal inner workings and underground spaces of the library, but it illuminates something deeper. It raises questions about what libraries contain, not only the collections, but the collective memory, the unseen labor, and the human relationships that allow knowledge to endure. Her work invites us to see the library as a metaphor for our shared subconscious, a place where memories, histories, and emotions are stored, visited, and reimagined. It asks us what we uncover when we look beneath the surface of both libraries and ourselves, and how those discoveries can deepen connections, understanding, and healing. Hadassa's work goes to the core mission of the National Library of Israel, to preserve the collective memory of the Jewish people for the present and for future generations. We're also fortunate to have the opportunity to hear Hadassa and James explore these themes together today. Many of you know James Snyder, who leads this great institution, the Jewish Museum, as its director. He's held leadership positions in some of the most important cultural institutions and organizations, including as executive chair of the Jerusalem Foundation, director, and later international president of the Israel Museum, and as deputy director of the Museum of Modern Art, among other positions. Hadassa Goldvicht is an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and lecturer. Her work explores the relationship between language and ritual, as well as individual and collective mechanisms of pain and healing. Her works are included in both private and public collections, including the Jewish Museum, the Israel Museum, the Frankfurt Jewish Museum, the Tel Aviv Museum, among others. And she has exhibited her work widely, including at the National Library of Israel and the Jewish Museum. With that, I am very honored to bring Hadassa and James to you today for an enlightening conversation.
Good evening to all of you. A pleasure to have all of you here. You know, we do a lot of talks in this room, and it's actually great. It's very energizing for us. And we cover many topics, and we have all kinds of great speakers. But I have to say that there's something quite special this evening, doing this together with Hadassa, whom I've actually had the privilege to know for a very long time, more than 20 years. Starting with Tina's and my time in Jerusalem when I was at the Israel Museum. And to be here with Hadassa and have this chance to talk, and you'll hear more about how our paths have crossed so many times over these years, but also to be here with friends not just of the Jewish Museum, but also of the National Library of Israel. During all of my years at the Israel Museum, to be neighbors with the National Library, first at Givat Ram, and now with its move to Rupin Boulevard, it's really pretty nice to have all of you here at my next home, with the library having moved from one home to another, true, just a stone's throw apart, but still in its new home and being here with us. So that's great, and we appreciate that all of you are here with us, and it is very nice. And you know, it's funny, actually, Adina, you scooped something. You did it quietly and in passing, but I wanted to talk about how the Israel Museum was the first museum to buy Hadassa's work, and I learned when Hadassa and I were preparing that actually the Jewish Museum in New York was the first museum to acquire her work back in 2005. And I think you have an image of what that work was.
Here it is. Should I say something about this work?
Please, you must.
Okay, so this work was actually, it's called Writing Lesson 1, and it's my first video work, and in the ultra-Orthodox world, when a boy is 3, he's taken to school for the first time and asked to lick honey off the Hebrew letters, so their first experience of the language would be sweet. And this is a part of a series of works that have to do with language and material, and I guess we're going to talk a lot about that today. Yeah.
And you know, we showed this work at the Israel Museum. We weren't the first to acquire it. This museum was. But this is actually a great way for us to get started, because before we get to our subject of the evening, and our subject is to the internal libraries, Biblioscopia, which is the title of the work that has just concluded at the National Library, which actually I had the privilege to see just about a month ago, together with Hadassa. But before we get there, really, and you've already made this segue, you got to tell us about where you came from, you know, how you were born and raised, and just talking about writing lesson 1, you put your toe in that water, or I should say in that honey, because you had a very religious upbringing, and yet from day one, you wanted to be an artist, and you wanted to make art. So tell us about that.
Right. Well, I grew up in Jerusalem. My family is 7 generations in Jerusalem, and I come from a long line of women who tried to be artists and wanted to be artists. My non-Jerusalem great-grandmother was a writer in Germany. I'm named after her. Her name was Esther, and her writing name, her pseudonym was Hadassa. She was murdered at Auschwitz and there's, I guess my grandmother and my mother, and for they each kind of made one step forward to allow this creativity that of either writing or making art. And I'm feeling very privileged to be in this fourth generation of women actually getting to make work. But I come from a long line of Hasidic rabbis, and I feel actually very connected to what they do and what my work is, and how, in many ways, we might talk about that a little as well. Yes.
We're going to come to all of that, and I don't want you to read your CV, but just tell us where you studied art, because it's pretty remarkable given that you were from this ultra-Orthodox background in Jerusalem, and you pursued a certain path.
Well, so my parents, coming from the world that they grew up with, were actually filmmakers and trying to navigate these two worlds. And when I was very young, they made films here in New York and took us here as children, which is why I have this semi-fake American accent.
It's pretty good.
Thank
Don't
you.
worry.
It comes and goes when I'm tired, but but I've always kind of been in between these two worlds. And as a 6-year-old, my mother would send me to the Israel Museum to the art courses there, and she was kind of. My parents were filmmakers, and my rebellion to be a video artist, that's kind of as far as I got. But really, I got to see my kind of parents try to make work and make many films of their own. And I ended up going to Bezalel, and then coming as an exchange student to RISD. And after, 2 days before I left, I got a scholarship to stay, and then I ended up doing my master's at the School of Visual Arts and actually living for many years here in New York. Yeah.
And this is a pretty remarkable trajectory. And as we were speaking about what we would discuss tonight, I started to think of all these 20 plus years that I've known Hadassa's work, and I've seen it at different stages as she really dug into video art. And I started to think about this upbringing deep in faith, but this persistent pursuit of engagement with art. And it's like the theme tonight is materiality to metaphor, because that's really, time and again, what your work has been about.
So I think I think we've. I always think about language as material. When we as growing up kind of in between writing and making artwork, I always think about language as material. Like, is language just the words we say, or how does it actually stand here in the room? What does it contain? And that really thinking of language as material, I think, might be the source of everything. That the more we learn how to talk, we actually stop saying real things. And then if we think about what is really language, then we come back to ourselves and remember who we are. Maybe that's this piece, that's what it's about. Yeah.
It's funny, and we didn't rehearse this. That is what this is about. But I want to move us to the project that you did, which became Lullaby, where over a number of years, I think concluding in 2012 when we exhibited it at the Israel Museum, 500 or so people of all kinds, you requested that they sing a lullaby, either from their childhood or that they sang to their children. So it was really about making an inventory of language through an inventory of human voices, compiling language.
Right, so I think that if we think about, if you ask someone what lullaby was sang to them as a child, and we're going to see some singing in a minute, then they kind of take down their guard and something real comes out, which is the essence of language. And this piece was, Lullaby is a piece where I asked 500 workers in the Israel Museum to sing a lullaby they remember from their childhood. This is the time you can go to sleep if you want, a lullaby. This is one of the guards singing, and
Антошка, пойдем копать картошку. Антошка, Антошка, пойдем копать картошку. Тили-пили, трали-вали. Это мы не проходили, это нам не задавали. Тарам-пам-пам, тарам-пам-пам.
When the moon shines o'er the lonely pines,
So
and
you were
the
very generous
sleepy
to take part in
world
this
has
work.
gone to rest. I lie a-dreaming, my thoughts are scheming, and the music so enchanting. Fireflies are dancing to the sweet tune that we love to croon.
Okay. This really does go on for a while. I will say that my kids grew up listening to this, and they can recite the different songs in this.
And you
song,
know,
so,
it was
yes.
totally entrancing, this thing. We installed it, and people were riveted. They couldn't leave because you saw two examples from two different ends of the spectrum, but it was every kind of language and every kind of member of the population of the staff of the museum. It was really pretty remarkable. And it was about using your work to engage with humanity. And that sort of takes us, we're going to do one more work along this trajectory before we come to Biblioscopia. But in 2017, this was really great. For the Venice Biennale, Hadassa produced a work which was really stunning, called House of Life, where over a number of years, she interviewed a guy named Aldo Izzo, who was the keeper of all the Jewish cemeteries of Venice. And it was really about his experience being responsible for that history and, in a way, creating an inventory of Jewish life in Venice by engaging with cemeteries which preserved the memory of all of those who had lived there and then passed there.
So I will say that I make works with communities and institutions around the world, as you see, and you'll see more. And with each work, I kind of come in with also a question of my own life. When I did Lullaby, I was waiting for my kids to arrive, and I don't know if you know this, but I found out I was pregnant the day of the opening. And with Lullaby, I was with the House of Life, the piece I did in Venice when I worked with the director of the cemetery, Aldo Izzo, for many years. I was preparing to say goodbye to my beloved grandparents. And I think that, and this piece is really a piece about life and death, kind of came to life together with the Israel Museum and Corinne Stampalia and Andrea Maislin Projects. Was really about kind of not being afraid of life and death when I was actually an a young mom. Yeah.
You know, of course we remembered the moment because it really was great, because the Venice Biennale is all the pavilions that are official participants, but then there are collateral projects throughout Venice. Corinne Stampalia is a very classy venue, and we were all there. One of our curators from the Israel Museum curated the project. We all arrived, and Hadassa did tell us that she was expecting her next child. And it was really pretty remarkable. And you know, in a way, a project like that might have been overlooked by all of those who were focused only on the official pavilions of the Biennale, but this drew an incredible amount of attention. The media coverage worldwide was fantastic. And, you know, just talk for a moment about how you felt producing that work, given your own history and background, and how you felt producing it there, working with someone so rooted to the history of Venice, and yet you were doing this for a far broader plane of those who would become engaged with it.
So I arrived to Venice, kind of invited to do this piece for 500 years to the Jewish ghetto and to the community. And it was the final years. I mean, I didn't know that when I arrived, but it turned out to be the final years of what they felt was the community. I started going from house to house, and each person said to me, I'm really old. My kids moved away because I can't live in Venice anymore, so I'm So here are my books, and I can't move away. And I would film them for a few years and then give the footage to their children as they passed away. And I found myself suddenly making this archive of this community that was a dying community, and it was really interesting to find this out together with Aldo Ito, who was creating his own archive within the cemetery, and finding out how sometimes artists need, what artists need to be in this world, creating archives that don't really exist yet, or maybe are not asked for or called for, and that was a really transformative exhibition, which you had such a big part of. Yeah.
Well, and also what was moving was to see how Aldo Ito, who never really thought about the broader context for what he was accomplishing, he felt so rooted to where he was. And this is in part why and how the media became so much more engaged with the work and with the project.
Well, I think Aldo Ito was the head of the cemetery, and we were not expecting a piece about the cemetery to draw so much media, but also he ended up kind of this man who's been trying to save this place for 20 years on the cover of the New York Times, and that was maybe the best moment of him getting the spotlight that he deserved, and yes.
Actually, House of Life became a kind of afterlife, which is going to live for a very long time. It was pretty remarkable. And you know, this segues us to our subject of the evening, which is Hadassa's project, Biblioscopia, at the National Library. And you know, and again, for the two of us, there's a kind of resonance that has a lot of meaning here. For me, being at the Israel Museum, during the entire period of the shift, and you all know this, the National Library, when it was really on the Hebrew University campus, part of the university while being the National Library, being emboldened to seize the opportunity for independence and to find a site that really made a statement. And you know, we had just finished rebuilding the Israel Museum, which, as you recall, we called renewal, and we renewed the campus of the Israel Museum as it turned 45. We sat up on the Acropolis of our hill, and suddenly there was the opportunity for the National Library to be on the opposite hill. And from the first moment, all of you who are friends of the National Library may appreciate knowing this, the library embraced having us in the museum engaged in the site, the setting, and the design of the library, so that we could make a statement about the importance of culture at this site, which is really the entrance to Jerusalem, where you have the Givat Ram campus of the university, where you have the Supreme Court, the Knesset, and there we were. And now, you've all been there, you know the beauty of the National Library resonating with the beauty of the Israel Museum, really making a statement about the place of culture in the country. And it's really quite something that's quite meaningful. And you know, watching Hadassa develop her project, it was also about this notion of the transformative shift of the library from its old home to its new home. And you know, she's going to show you the fantastic book that she did as part of the project. And I thought, why is this called Biblioscopia? And Hadassa said, well, you know, it's an architectural MRI. And I said, well, it's not, it's a colonoscopy. And this is actually what Hadassa is now going to explain to us. So I'm going to turn all this over to you, and it's this whole story of materiality to metaphor, how a colonoscopy can actually become an architectural MRI, and an inventory of memory through books. Take it away.
Okay. So this is where I get to tell you a story. So the old National Library used to have these conveyor belts where books would travel. Every person who would kind of order a book, the books would travel throughout these conveyor belts from the librarians to the reader. I will say that I would go to the National Library as a child very early on, and because I read very quickly, I'm one of those people who need to have a close relationship with the librarian so I could get to have more books. And And for many years, I had this idea of these conveyor belts. I had this idea of these conveyor belts being the actual channels of the subconscious of the local culture. Like this idea of that any book that anyone ever kind of yearned for went through this channel was really remarkable to me. And I, for years, tried to convince the library when it was in its old building to that these very old conveyor belts were, in fact, the subconscious channels of culture, and that I would like to film within them, and so we started, after several years, we started filming there in 2020, and this is actually the first view that I saw when the camera went up. The conveyor belts were up high on the ceiling. You couldn't see anything. And this is what we saw. And it was as if there was a river running in the library. And it was such a moment of joy because it looked like what I wanted it to look like. It looked like what I thought the subconscious channels of culture are. And I guess the other weird thing that I need to tell you when I show this work is that when I was filming this piece, I had really bad back pain for many years, and I was having a hard time walking, and I was doing all these MRIs to try to figure out why I couldn't walk. And then I remember myself lying down in an MRI machine knowing that I need to film this piece, thinking, now I know how to film this work. Like, how do I film the National Library with its 4 million books at a moment of transformation a few years before, when it was kind of preparing to move to its new location, and then kind of filming it as an MRI machine. So the camera is put on the conveyor belt and falls each time. And it also broke, of course, throughout the years as we filmed it. And it completely changes with every view, with every drop. There's no, I mean, this is actually how it looked. And if you think about language, and sometimes we are very kind of, language is very crisp, and sometimes it's kind of runs away from us, and it looked like everything I wanted it to look like. And I started, this is actually where the books come out of. I just gave birth to my third son as I did this piece, and this piece is called Delivery, and it just looked like birth. And I was also very interested in, as I was kind of hardly walking within the library, I was talking to the workers of the library, the kind of the underground floors of the stacks, and they were becoming my guides. And they were, so first of all, it was all kind of decorated with these posters of old calendars, which I was very interested in, and the entire floors, and they were telling me about kind of the changes within their work. They all were cataloging books for dozens of years. They knew the location of every book. And this is actually a footage where the camera is placed on the librarian's cart, and it goes and slowly scans the entire library, and you could see the library slowly emptying out and kind of falling apart. I mean, to rebuild in its new location. And the librarian had this knowledge of where every book went, and it became obsolete. It was transformed, and I think this transformation of what language is and how we have it mostly on our phone and our relationship with it changes is something that's really kind of in all of our lives. And this is more of these scans within the library of the posters kind of decorating them. And I think what's interesting is that if we think of our connection to language, we no longer have the ability to say, oh, we don't want this book, but actually the book next to it, we don't use our intuition anymore. And those changes are part of the changes of our culture. It's not specific to the library, it's really everywhere. And kind of what I'm showing you is this show that was up at the National Library, to the internal libraries, where now you kind of see these compacted shelves open and close like a heart or like lungs. And really thinking of the library as an extension of our own body, and I'll kind of quickly say that this piece is kind of a meditation. And this is actually the conveyor belt hung on the wall and kind of brought back to life. When the library left, I bought and kind of have, if anybody misses the old National Library, it's now in my studio in Jerusalem. And this is the conveyor belt brought back to life and kind of is hanging on the wall like a scroll. Because if we think about scrolls, they're constantly like changing to, so this is it, moving. And I'll just kind of say very quickly that, and maybe we can turn on the lights now, and this is the empty library, that when I finished filming this work, I went through rehabilitation and recovered from this years of back pain, and I really see that connection. But what was very interesting for me is that I realized from this process of recovering myself is that we, in order to heal, we need to kind of go into our internal libraries, and maybe we could speak about that. Yeah.
You know, really, I did have the privilege to go through the exhibition. We did it together, and here we are on our way in to the exhibition. And to do this with Hadassa, and you know, it is funny because on the one hand, it could be that this is talking about, you know, an architectural MRI, but really what it is that you have now preserved from the old library in a way, as you describe, as artifactual in the new library, but that isn't what the experience of being in the exhibition was. You felt the beating heart of the memory of those books and the knowledge that they held in them, having moved from one place to another in a funny way to become the beating heart of the new NLI, which of course benefits from all of the digital technology that now makes it so much easier to get access to the material books and also to the content of those books without actually having access to the books.
And also now being able to, for so many people to access it, many more than ever before, yeah.
And it's really quite moving. And the other thing, we took a selfie of the two of us, but what was so amazing, you know, many of us, I'm sure Tina and I were planning to be at the dedication of the library on October 14th, 2023. We didn't get there. Several months later, I was able to go for the first time. And everything was so cautionary then, but you entered the library and every seat, every carrel in the well that went from the entrance level down to the depository of the books, every carrel was occupied. And it was every kind of person. It was the diversity of all the people who live in the Holy Land. And they were seeking solace there. And then fast forward to a month and a half ago when the two of us met at the entrance, you can't imagine how bustling. It was like the crossroads of humanity. Every kind of person who lives in the Holy Land was there. And people were so engaged with each other.
It really became a huge source of comfort since the war. It's really unbelievable how transformative it has been to visit there, because it ended up opening at a time where it was really very much needed, and it's kind of transforming the cultural environment of what a library is and why people go there. It's really interesting.
And you know, from being a place of solace, it's become a place of it's become a place for nurturing and the flowering of humanity in a setting where there's still so much contention around it, but there you really feel that people are becoming committed to engaging with one another and finding that place as a source of nurturing. And you know, it's hard to respond to a comment like that, but I want you to tell us, so what's your take on the NLI now? I mean, you did this amazing project. You were so connected. And you know, the first time that I saw the conveyor belt that looks like a river, really, you can't believe it. You can't believe what you're looking at. And that's where you started. So today, the show is down, the book survives, and the book looks actually like, here you have to describe, this is an old-fashioned book. right? Do you see that? So how do you feel about this NLI?
So I actually, as part of this work, as many of my other works, I interviewed dozens of workers in the library and got to be very close to many of them, to the guards, to the workers of the stacks, which really took part. And this book actually contains several interviews out of those conversations. And in a way, I had the privilege of being allowed to be in the library and creating kind of a separate archive for it, and that was a real gift. So when I go in there, I see the people. The guard in the entrance is an opera singer at night. I know the stories of the workers, and it's been such a privilege to have these relationships. Yeah.
And you know, that's a segue to talking about why you're here now and what you're starting to do here in New York. And you know, you can pack a lot of what you described into what your agenda here is all about. For me, it's like this amazing medical, metaphorical experience that you had in the library, and also where what gave humanity to it for you was getting to know everybody, knowing all the workers in the setting, which is what we experienced working with you from the Israel Museum. So now you're suddenly coming here to New York, you're gonna do a project. Well, when Hadassa first called me, she said, I'm so excited, I'm gonna do a project in the library at the Metropolitan Museum. I'm talking to the New York Public Library. And I said, what about us? So now there are 3 venues for the project that you're gonna tell us about.
Right. So I think that when I finished filming this project in the National Library in April of 23, and then I had this full kind of scan of the library, of this body of knowledge of the Jewish people. And then everything fell apart. And it felt like there was something about that was very interesting, because we are at a time where it feels like a lot of the world we know is falling apart everywhere. And I felt like having the privilege to kind of look at that body of knowledge a second before it changes is really meaningful, because in order to think of who we want to become in our next reincarnation, we have to look back at our bodies of knowledge. And I think at a very generous visit, I got to do at the Met, and at the Met Library at the Watsons, I realized that what would this work be like what about the collective subconscious? I mean, how can we connect all these different bodies of knowledge within cultural institutions to one very complex internal subconscious? How do we go in there, really look at our internal stacks and think of who we are becoming at a time of AI, at a time where all these changes are happening? And so I guess each project, like my children, has its own DNA, and it's very different. But I will say that I was very privileged to begin filming at the Watson Library. Thank you, Ken. And I walked that walk this week with having the camera on the librarian's cart, and I suddenly realized that I'm filming the same piece when I'm completely healthy. And what is this piece going to be like when I'm now no longer in pain, but actually looking at it from a different perspective? And the piece that I'm doing at the here at the Jewish Museum, which is really started from our conversation, and a wonderful conversation with back and forth with you and Shira, is really becoming something completely different, and it's more about the collection of the Jewish Museum, which is formed and kind of initially by trauma and by war, and then kind of developed from there. And what is it like to look at all these beautiful objects of the Judaica and the art together intertwined, and how do they reflect on each other, and what they mirror on to us, what do they tell us about ourselves, is something that I'm really fascinated about. So it's kind of like looking at a baby and thinking who they're going to become. So, but I feel very, I'm at the point of getting like these prophecies of what these works would be like, and it's a very lovely part of being an artist.
And you know, it's very exciting to think about, there's such a synergy here, and to think about how you're going to bring a project which was about animating the inanimate, and really creating an opportunity to engage with memory and to bring to life a story that might otherwise have just gone into storage. And what you did in the library, and to come here, and you're exactly correct, to the point that it's not just conflict at home in the Middle East, which we all felt so heavily at the moment when the NLI couldn't open. It's about the world is in a very challenging time. And to think that you might be able to bring from there to here a process that allowed you to engage in ways that can bring what we do here, the library, the museum, to life in a way that can engage with humanity, with humanism, with the focus on humanism, is something that can be really important.
And I think there's something about looking at, within different institutions, the entire body of knowledge, the entire collection, or the entire 4 million books in the National Library, or 1 million books in the Watson, is something about looking at our entire body. When we go to a doctor these days, it's very specialized, and you can go to like a hand doctor, or a foot doctor, or a back doctor. But I think when we look at ourselves and how we can heal, we need to look at our soul and our mind and our body and all of it. And there's something about looking at an entire collection of an institution that is trying to really look at the soul of things. And the guides to that are always the workers of the institution, which is the best part.
I was actually going to ask you, will you at the Met, at the Public Library and here, engage with all of the staffs of those museums, those institutions, in the way that in Israel you've really always committed yourself to engaging with all the workers?
I think that's...
And why? What's the importance of doing that?
I think that coming as an exterior person to a community in Venice, to an institution, and assuming things about the institution is very problematic. And the best part about the work is actually listening to the workers and them becoming the guides, and then having them really teach me and tell me something, so many things about the place, and then having the work become a kind of collaboration. And then the best part, well, there's so many good parts here, but having it out in the world and engage with the institution and see that kind of dialogue, that's a wonderful thing that happens sometimes.
You know, my last comment, question, and then we'll take a few questions. There's this new subject that Tina and I have been hearing about, narrative medicine. It's like you've already mentioned that, like, you go to a doctor, you're in and you're out. And now there's a push to revive narrative medicine so that you amplify the story. You bring humanism into the story once again. So it's not just pure science and clean science. And in a way, that's what your work has always been about.
Well, do you know that the place we experience pain in our brain, both physical and emotional, is the same place? It's the same place in our brain, and there's really you can't separate the two. And then I guess what happens when we stay in our pain and remember that actually more than everything, our body, both our personal and collective bodies, know how to heal very well, and that's that's where hope lies.
You have to not just film, you have to write about all this, because really for you, this notion of this sort of medical metaphor, which then ends up being a way to embrace humanity, it's something that we all need. You know, the world's having a challenging time, and these are the strategies that can help us improve.
Well, I'll just kind of say that as we look at some of our leaders fail, we understand that we need to be the leaders to bring the change. Each and every one of us has kind of that responsibility within this big wave of AI and everything that we kind of feel is taking over. Each and every one of us has a role here, and I guess that gives a lot of meaning into what we're doing.
It's a nice way to conclude, and the one funny thing is we agreed we weren't going to say the word AI.
Forgive
and
me,
you've
I'm
done
sorry.
It twice.
I apologize, you're right.
So take that back. Really, it's been
take it back.
wonderful
I take it
talking to
back.
you. We're going to take a few questions if you have. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Here, hold on a sec. It's coming.
Thank you so much. I got to relive the exhibit that I happened to serendipitously meet you at back in Jerusalem. My question is about a documentary that you're both familiar with called The Museum, which is about the staff of the Israel Museum. The staff members at the Israel Museum, the guards, many of them from the former Soviet Union are actually trained museum experts, curators, who, they didn't get licensure in Israel, and this is the closest they could be. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful experience watching that documentary. Have you thought of making something, about the NLI staff? Do they have similar backgrounds?
That might be a better question for Adina when we finish. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because when Hadassa was talking about the guard at the NLI who's an opera singer, I suddenly thought about the guard in the Shrine of the Book who is filmed in the museum, the documentary we did for the 50th anniversary of the museum. And it's exactly the same kind of story, where the way that you embrace humanity is by engaging with people, talking to them, and bringing out of them these stories that make you realize the richness of them, which doesn't have to do just with what they're wearing when you meet them and where they're standing and why they're standing there.
They are the museum.
Well, I will say that my favorite event at the National Library was of the guard who is an opera singer at night, singing all to us in her. I mean, the incredible staff was really taking a lead in the events, and that was, these people are taking care of our lives, and sometimes they are not getting kind of the spotlight deserved, and it's really incredible for them. It was wonderful to hear their voices and stories.
Another question? One other. Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much, Hadassa, for being here. I have a question about if you could expand on your process in the films that we saw, the clips and how you use sound. In Lullaby, you have human voices, and in Biblioscopia, you have an instrumental that coincides with the sound of the conveyor belt. And I'd love for you to expand on, within your artistic process, at what point do you bring sound in to your film, and how that kind of contributes to this collective memory that you're looking for in these collections?
That's a great question. So actually, in many of the works, including the works in the library, I record sound. For instance, part of the sound of the library piece is the scanning of the books that the librarian called Hadar Levi did as the books were moving to the new building, and we kind of used that sound as the base of creating the music. And so it's always kind of taking something found from and then using it as the source. And really, the work is kind of, it's always weird to show it like this on a screen, because it's a sound installation that each piece is kind of, each video has its own soundtrack, and they all kind of come together as a musical piece, as an orchestra.
You know, it's interesting seeing the exhibition together with Hadassa. You would think that people coming to the library, and there have been other exhibitions already, and they've been beautiful, stunning, and often with manuscripts. And, you know, so you wonder, why would someone come in and see an exhibition called Biblioscopia, which has something to do with the shelves of the old library? And why would people go there? But it was packed when we were there, and people were transfixed by these incredible installations of video and sound. It was something pretty remarkable.
Well, I think the pieces are a meditation, and they kind of come to slow us down at a time where everything kind of, language is thrown at us, so much is requested from us, and it's a real time to slow down. And I think that it was very interesting to see them come out of the exhibition, and kind of the generosity of people engaging. Yeah.
And there was surprise because it was something not expected by them or for them. And the meditative dimension of it was really quite important.
Yeah.
So with this, two things, and then I want Adina to come back up and say a few closing words. First of all, we really have to applaud Hadassa. She forged a path for herself over the last 20 plus years, which is not a typical path. And she's done it, and she is flourishing. And we really need to applaud her, to encourage her to keep moving in the way that she has.
So this is the part where I panic, because I know there's so many people to thank who were part of this evening. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Adina, and all the staff of the Jewish Museum and the National Library. Thank you, Andrea Maislin, who has such an important part in this. This is the part where I get really nervous at all the wonderful people I need to thank.
Stop getting nervous.
Okay.
What I want to conclude with, and then you're coming up to conclude the evening. Next week, we're opening Women of the Wiener Werkstätte. And you know, Hadassa doesn't stand alone here. She is on the shoulders of women who, for a very long time, have moved forward in creative ways that need to be surfaced, documented, understood, and need to become part of the canon of what modern and now contemporary art history is all about. So really, you deserve even more applause.
So just so my Jewish guilt doesn't kick in, you will allow me to thank my husband for watching the kids while I film, and Artiz for hosting my residency. Okay, that's it.
And he's here, and we can thank him too. And now, Adina, come on back.
Well, your talk reminded me of something that I want to share related to the workers. James, you mentioned, you talked about how the library was supposed to open on October 17th. And of course, that was 10 days after October 7th. I actually landed in Israel on October 6th to get ready for the opening, which was not, the celebration was not going to happen for obvious reasons, but eventually we opened on October 29. But the point is that we did do a celebration at some point. And what it was a celebration for the workers. We never had a grand celebration for the full community and the dignitaries and the donors. We didn't have anything really formal, but we did have for the construction workers and the people whose hands touched the building. So you reminded me of that, that value that you have explored and that the library really upheld, and that connectivity between those two things. I want to invite you all to enjoy some refreshments, to enjoy the galleries. They're open until 8 p.m., and to continue to enjoy the National Library of Israel's programs, both virtually and more in person, whether it's here or in Jerusalem. The National Library of Israel is in Israel, but we are expanding our impact to the wider world, and we want you to know that this is your library. The National Library of Israel is the library of the Jewish people worldwide, and we invite you to enjoy the offerings both in person and virtually, and we look forward to our continued friendship with all of you. So thank you.